Vi ska resa tillbaks i tiden då jag i den här boken hittar ett kapitel om de gyllene bilarna. 2 DeLoreans var nämligen tillverkade i 24 karats guld. Det var dock bara fragment av en historia som man förstod var lika fantastisk som problematisk. Och till min förvåning så var den aldrig gjord tidigare någon form av filmatisering. Varför? Var det för svårt att göra? Eller varför fanns detta bara i kortfattad bokform? Det sådde i alla fall ett frö i mig som senare växte ännu mer. Och då jag i Los Angeles 2015 träffade vd:n för DeLorean Motor Company inför en annan video, så passade jag på att fråga vad han visste om guldbilarna.
I know the one in Reno, that was driven for a few years because the original owner was a doctor and he drove it as his everyday car. And then as time went by, the insurance became so expensive that he had to stop driving the car. Then what they call the third car was actually made up from leftover panels because the factory was obliged to have replacement parts. And when they moved everything to Ohio, they decided to make another car. That car ended up that it could not be sold, so they ended up making the car as a raffle prize. I actually have a set of wheels from the gold car that we inherited when we bought the inventory, but nothing else. It's somewhere on the East Coast, Maryland or something like that. That car comes up for sale about every 2 or 3 years, but every time it comes up for sale, the price goes up, and I think the last time it was like $250,000, maybe more. Which
For the third one?
For the third one, yeah.
Steven berättar också att en av de 2 officiella guldbilarna står på ett museum här i Los Angeles som just då höll på att byggas om. Men efter ett telefonsamtal senare så är jag välkommen ner i garaget där bilen står förvarad. Men innan jag beger mig dit så måste jag bara fråga om DeLoreans originalmotor som fått så mycket skitsnack genom åren. Och Danny Botkin som jobbar med bilarna i flera år var helt rätt person att svara på det.
I think it's a really good engine. It's probably the best oiling engine I've ever seen in my life. The reason why people say that is because, you know, they expected a little bit more out of John DeLorean. He was the father of the muscle car. He came out with this engine, and it's a little underpowered for what people expected. It really wasn't for the time. 130 horsepower was about average for the time in early 80s. I used to work at a Chevrolet Pontiac dealerships when I was younger, and you know, it's a completely different type of customer. Back at the dealership, they want it real fast, cheap, done. They don't really care about their cars, but nobody has a passion for their cars more than DeLorean owners. And you can go into this one real quick. As you see there, this is a Stage 2 DeLorean engine. It has ported and polished heads, performance cams, and all new stainless steel dual exhaust. Really what every DeLorean should have had day one.
Det inte så många vet är att John DeLorean faktiskt hann tillverka 2 riktigt kraftfulla DeLorean-prototyper med dubbelturbo.
John DeLorean sent 2 cars off to Legend Turbo to get 2 of them done because he knew he needed a faster car. He knew he needed a power. But unfortunately they never came to fast. I mean, there are 2 of them out there, the prototypes. But the company didn't stay long enough for John to do the things he wanted to do with it.
Några DeLorean-ägare har faktiskt bytt till snabbare motorer genom åren. Ett ingrepp som Danny inte längre tar på sig.
My last one was a GM Vortec 4.3 liter engine. And that thing boasted out about 300 horsepower. I can actually lift the tires off the ground. But other people's done the LS1. I've seen even a Cadillac Northstar, rotary engines. You know, I've seen a lot of different engines. You've got a lot of room to do it. This is a big engine compartment. And so you can play with it any way you want. I got another guy who's actually putting in a V12 Jaguar motor in one.
Men att byta motor förstör på många sätt de här bilarna.
You do ruin some of the handling and things like that. You know, I don't think there's any right now the way the car's set up. I think that the Stage 2 is the way to go, or even maybe Stage 3 if you want a little bit more with the supercharger. But changing engines is something I just don't do anymore. It takes the value from the car. It's very hard to sell a car with an aftermarket engine in it.
You know, when you're dealing with cars that are 30 plus years old, anything can happen in 30 years. But we have seen very, very few engine failures as the years have gone by. The highest mileage that I'm aware of, we have a customer here in Southern California who got up to like 750,000 miles with the original engine. And I've seen many with 200,000 plus over the years. Our big problem is not wear and tear. The big problem is people don't drive the cars enough. You know, they don't get to wear them out. You know, I would say The majority of the fleet of DeLoreans that still exist today have less than 100,000, and I'd say a majority of those have less than 50,000. So it's more just encouraging people to drive the cars is what we need to see happen.
Men det nu jag måste se är den första guldbilen. Jag beger mig mot museet. Och här står den första guldbilen. Det var en overklig känsla när man hört och läst om den, och nu står den här framför mig.
We've had it for about 10 years. It was donated by the family who originally purchased it. This has the black interior. It's also automatic. I believe the one at the National Automobile Museum is the only one with the manual transmission. This is an automatic. It's a great research tool for DeLorean enthusiasts and car enthusiasts. Most of the body panels are gold plated. There are a few that are plastic, like on the nose. I think you can see it's painted plastic, and on the rear as well. But the majority of the body panels have 24 karat gold on them. We joke that it's the only car in our collection that fluctuates, that its value fluctuates every day because it does have a little bit of gold on it. So it's a really special car, and I think people really enjoy seeing it. The third one was made from parts that were left over. American Express kept some replacement parts in case anything went wrong with this one or the other one that was purchased. So there is a third one out there. I believe it's in private hands, but the two original from the American Express promotion are both in museums.
Det var på resan hem igen till Sverige som det redan sådda fröet började att växa rejält. Nu visste jag vart båda officiella guldbilarna fanns idag, trots att jag bara sett en live. Och den tredje då, ihopplockade bilen, fick jag ju en viss hint om i vilket område den fanns, men ändå ingen som riktigt exakt visste vart. Förutom att den var i privat ägo och inte på ett museum. Väl hemma så började arbetet med att först kontakta museet i Reno för att se om jag fick komma över dit och filma den andra officiella guldbilen. Och det var inte så lätt som jag först trodde, men efter lite mejlande och ringande så lyckades jag hitta rätt person som kunde ge mig grönt ljus att komma över. Då var det bara en sak kvar, att lokalisera den tredje bilen. Och via mycket googlande, både via forum och gamla artiklar, så hittade jag till slut det jag sökte, och ett namn. Men USA är stort och jag behövde ett telefonnummer. Efter ännu mera sökande så ser jag till min förvåning att jag har en DeLorean-broder som bor i delstaten. Och när jag kontaktar honom så är det bullseye. Han känner den här farbrorn och kan nog också leta fram ett telefonnummer. Samma dag ringer det i ett hus några timmar utanför Washington. Det var ju lite som att ringa till Fort Knox och fråga om man får komma ner i bankvalvet och filma guld. Det är en lite skeptisk men ändå trevlig herre som svarar i telefonen. När jag berättar vad jag jobbar med och vad jag håller på att spela in så ber han mig faxa över papper på företaget. Fax, tänker jag. Finns de verkligen fortfarande? Det visar sig att han varken har mobil eller mail, så det blev en oväntad nöt att knäcka. Men då han berättade att en sköterska besökte honom varje onsdag så fick jag hennes mail, och mejlade jag henne så kunde hon skriva ut mina uppgifter och ta med det till honom kommande vecka, och jag skulle då återkomma på torsdagen. Veckan gick och då jag ringde upp höll jag tummarna. Signalerna går fram och jag hör igen farbrorn som svarar. Då hade jag egentligen bara 3 frågor jag behövde få svar på. 1. Har du fått mejlet? 2. Har du läst mejlet? 3. Får jag komma över och filma hos dig? Jag fick ja på samtliga 3 och drygt 9 månader sedan första resan så var jag på väg över Atlanten igen. Denna gång för att hämta in de 2 andra bilarna. Den andra officiella och den tredje som var ihopplockad av reservdelar. Jag landade i San Francisco som utgångspunkt. Staden med den kalla sommardimman, bron The Golden Gate samt det gamla fängelset Alcatraz och kabelspårvagnarna i de branta backarna. Och huset där en annan Mikael härjade som objuden gäst 1990 i filmen Pacific Heights. Men jag ska vidare ut från stan för att bila upp till Reno i Washoe County i delstaten Nevada. Staden är belägen cirka 550 kilometer nordväst om Las Vegas. Men till skillnad från Las Vegas där folk gifter sig på löpande band så blev Reno känt för alla människor som strömmade dit för att skilja sig från 1931 till 1970-talet. Och morgonen därpå så styr jag mot bilmuseet i stan där den andra guldbilen ska finnas.
If you're going to have a DeLorean, you either got to have a Back to the Future car or a gold one. I mean, all DeLoreans are special, don't get me wrong, but I mean, it's in the museum atmosphere, you want something that's more than just special. And it's just, the wow factor is just amazing when you explain to people that it's actually plated in 24 karat gold. It's an amazing reaction. This particular car is one of the 2 gold-plated DeLoreans that were offered through the American Express catalog in 1981. This particular automobile was ordered by Sherwood Marshall of San Francisco, California. As I understand it, by the time the car was delivered, he had $90,000 invested in the machine with delivery and such, which is a fair piece of change for any automobile in 1981. It was his intention to drive and enjoy the automobile. He wasn't going to put it on blocks or display it or anything. It was just going to be his car, a statement of his position in life, I suppose. He intended to just use it as an everyday car and did so as such until it received a door ding, probably a parking lot dent as I was described. Took it to his insurance company to have it repaired. When they got the bill for replating a new panel for the automobile, they jacked his premiums up to such a level that he could no longer afford to drive the automobile. After debating what to do with the car, he loaned it to the museum here in Reno, the National Automobile Museum, and we cared for the automobile for some time until he finally decided to make it a permanent donation, and it has been part of our collection ever since.
Men 2014 inträffade en brand i museet som kunde ha slutat riktigt illa.
We did have an arson fire about 2 years ago. And the automobile, was not far from the point of impact. An individual broke the glass in the door, followed it up with an incendiary device, started a wall in the adjacent room on fire. This particular automobile wasn't in any particular danger of the fire. Happily, the sprinkler systems and all did their job, and I'm told that by the time the fire department arrived, and they're just across the river, the fire was basically out. Unfortunately, the heat had got the sprinkler caps in the ceiling in our sprinkler system, and when one of those caps broke loose, it landed on the roof of the car and spattered a little solder on the roof of the material on the roof. So I'm going to have to carefully remove that and replate those small areas just to remove those defects from the finish. We had a lot more damage done to one of our Roth trikes, and we'll get that one repaired one day. So this is really kind of a minor inconvenience, though it could have been so much worse had the systems not have functioned the way they did.
Även fast fordonen såklart är försäkrade och värderade så är det inget som museet skyltar med. Det finns liksom ingen anledning när de ändå aldrig är till salu.
Of course, our insurance company has to put a value on everything. That's their job. We don't put a value on anything because it's not for sale. As an artifact, they are a treasure and to be shared with the public, and that is our mission, is to share these vehicles and the history of these vehicles, and this automobile serves a unique place in that story.
Sen var det så dags att bege sig tillbaka till San Francisco genom fantastiska landskap och vyer. Och då hyrbilen var parkerad på flygplatsen så väntade en 5 timmars lång flygning till Washington och ytterligare några timmar i bil tills jag nådde huset där farbrorn till den privatägda guldbilen fanns. Och efter en kopp java i köket så drog vi äntligen ner till garaget.
$25-30 miles on it. That's about all. I didn't buy it to use. I bought it to show and try to get paid for that. That car right there has only got 3,000 miles on it. My son-in-law put time on when he got married. I loaned it to him for the honeymoon. This one is automatic, and the stainless steel one is a 5-speed. I think it's a heck of a nice car. I really do. What do you think about yours?
When he purchased the first one, I guess it kind of got in his blood at that point, and he decided to see what he could find. Overall, he just loves cars. You know, older cars and different cars. So I don't think he set out to be a DeLorean owner. This one he said he was going to purchase, so we were aware that he was going to do that one. But the first one, I was just sitting outside at the house and he pulled in it. He had been away for the weekend and came home with a car, which wasn't unusual. But this one, I knew he was going to get it, didn't know what to expect. I don't know much about cars, which is surprising growing up with him with all these cars. So I was kind of surprised, but it's been definitely a conversation piece ever since.
When was the last time you drove it?
Probably been 5 years. I've had it started since then, but not to take it out. Well, I never took it out anyway. Took it out, drove it out to the main road and back. That's about it. Well, I can't walk around and do much, you know. I can't use it. I'm not going to give it away. I don't have to.
That's so much more attractive than the other DeLorean, the standard gray.
Yeah, they're all gray.
Yeah, that's a beautiful color. I guess at times I'm the general caretaker of the car. It's been here for as long as I remember, as long as I've been married to my beautiful wife. And Carl has also thought of himself as a caretaker of the car. Before I met Carl, he'd actually had some health problems and had to give up showing it. So he couldn't take care of it anymore to get it to the car shows.
As far as I'm concerned, it can sit there and rot before I'd give it away.
This one or that one?
Either one. Well, we had the DeLorean Club here for a meeting. They had 6 DeLoreans from here, from different parts of the world. And they were quite impressed. In fact, they gave me the only one I've ever seen, a little miniature DeLorean, stainless steel, that they had made someplace. I don't know where they got it. But they were really impressed with it. We've got several letters from them.
Och när han låg på sjukhus en gång så blev han uppringd av självaste John Zachary DeLorean.
Well, is there John DeLorean called me? and was very nice. And explained some things of his ventures in life, and agreed that he was going to pick me up and fly me someplace for breakfast when I got out of the hospital. Well, that never happened.
He used a lot of pop rivets on that. We've driven it around the property here, and I have had the pleasure of doing that. 685 miles, I believe, on it, 680 miles. So it has been driven a little bit. That's probably has more, I would guess, more miles on it than either of the other two. I'm learning there are many different stories about not only this car, but the other two, and a lot of inaccuracies. So I'm still learning about it. I hope to learn more today. There are a few beautiful cars here, and I think that this one isn't practical. You know, I wouldn't be afraid to drive a Packard down the highway. This one, I don't think I ever would drive it down the highway. I don't think any DeLorean's going to rival a Ferrari or a Corvette, but they're beautiful cars. They are beautiful cars, and they're fun. You're not going to set a speed record with them, but they are fun to drive.
Samtliga bilar var nu inhämtade, och när jag på hemmaplan senare fick nys om att Stuart Craven var mannen som faktiskt hade i uppdrag att guldplätera bilarna, och även var den som personligen doppade delarna i guldet, så var det den sista saknade pusselbiten som jag bara måste ha med i filmen. Och ett år senare så åkte jag över till England för att träffa honom.
Here we have the box of all of the bits and pieces that I collected over the years. This is my DeLorean gold car box. All the panel, all the bits and pieces, all the photographs that I collected over the years. Samples, leather, stainless parts, more photographs, and all the paperwork that was part of the project. I think looking back, 30 years on, it was really quite an incredible achievement to actually do it under the pressures of time. There was a financial pressure, although that really was very much in the wrapping up process. At the end of it was collecting all the costs together to make sure it was done properly. And I do believe that they actually did make a profit. But the pressures to work under were enormous, really. You were left to your own devices. You were just, in some respects, it was a good way. It was a different way of working. It was completely new, I think, in the automotive industry in those days. Going back, say, 30 years, when you were told, this is what you have to do, just go do it. And these are all the people that worked in the Coventry office. I'm in the middle there, a bit younger. So not a very large office, it was just the purchasing office. What we basically did was that we went all over the country looking at the supply base, or looking after the supply base. We had to sell the company to the suppliers to enable them to work with us. This is the car we had in Coventry, the sales and marketing car. We had it over for a period of time so we could take it to the suppliers and say, yes, we are actually serious, we're building a car, this is it, so they could get a warm feeling that we were actually building cars. The whole process, the whole thing that we did was, I believe, something which we now do as the norm, as you might say. Anybody in the car industry these days works with the supplier. You work, you develop with the supplier. You don't do as we were expected to 30 odd years ago, that you were given a drawing and you went out and you said, make this, exactly to this drawing, where it would detail every way that the part was to be made, the processes, the finish, everything would be on the drawing. We didn't do that. We didn't have drawings. The drawing was the thing that happened very much after we had got the component to fit to the car. That was the car actually just before it's going into the wind tunnel, and before we move into obviously what was gold cars.
Och att sen göra bilarna i 24 karats guld gjorde inte saken lättare.
We normally expect to get a specification in terms of a particular job to do, that you get a product planning letter, and the product planning letter would tell you exactly what parts are going to be required for a car, what have to be gold plated and what don't have to be gold plated. For instance, the front and rear covers made by Phoenix had to be of a colour, they're plastic parts, they had to be of a colour that complemented the gold. The same was with the wheels. The wheels were made by Kent Alloys, and I went to Kent Alloys and said, look, have you got, I know you do gold coloured wheels, because a Rover car, an SD1 at that time, just probably I think about 12 months prior to us getting involved, the Rover did produce the car with gold wheels. So we said to Kent Alloys, look, can you spray up one of our wheels so we can take it to Belfast and show the people there and say, look, that's what we can do. It's a gold wheel, but it's not, it's painted, it's not actually plated. So that's what we did. But there were other components that, for instance, within the wheel, there is the Schrader valve. You can't have that sitting there in a sort of a chrome-plated finish in a gold wheel. So it was down to really what I thought best to do. I stood in front of a car and I looked at the car and I really said that, what can you see? I had a spares parts manual, and I used that manual to actually identify all the components that you can see when you open the doors, when you stand and look at the car, and therefore a decision then was made on what we should do with them. There was things like the rivets, the little pop rivets, which hold the door seals on. So we took a handful of pop rivets and I took them to a company in Coventry, and precious metal depositors, who actually gold plated them for us. So we had gold plated rivets, and nuts and bolts. Anything that was seen or would be seen by the customer when they opened the door and got into the car had to be either gold plated or in some cases painted.
So door hinges and tailpipe exhausts, some pop rivets, VIN plates and door seals. So those are all the components we sent over to them.
Och det är när Stuart börjar gräva djupare i minnet som den fantastiska historien om hur de bar sig åt och alla hinder på vägen kommer upp till ytan igen. Guldmaterial som jag fick med mig hem till Sverige. Jag ska nu ringa upp Barry Wills som jobbade som inköpsansvarig på DeLorean Motor Company Limited back in the days. Och han hade faktiskt access att gå ner och titta på guldbilarna i den välbevakade lokalen där de slutmonterades.
Yeah, I popped in on odd occasion to see how things were going, purely from an interest point of view. There was no role for me to take in what was going on in there. It was all being capably handled by George Broomfield's guy, Dick Kendall, and his small team, the best assembly operators that were chosen.
Det har både skrivits och ryktats om att guldbilarna aldrig testades i fabriken, men det stämmer inte.
They were certainly driven between the assembly plant and the fabrication building before they were plated. But I've read stories that the cars were not tested. The gold-plated cars were not tested. They certainly were. And in my book, John Z, The DeLorean and Me, there are colour pictures of the gold-plated cars being driven around the test track. They were treated in the same way as any other car that was assembled in the plant. They were being sold to customers. We had no idea whether they were going to go into glass cages or whether they were going to be driven on a daily basis, for all we knew. So they had to be produced in an identical manner to a regular production car. So the cars went through the regular testing around the test track. They were tested on the dynamometers in the emissions building, and their emissions were proven out. So yes, they were, in that sense, they were driven not far, but certainly far enough to satisfy the normal production requirement.
Men det var nog turen då att de tänkte 100 guldbilarna bara blev 2 till antalet från fabriken.
I think it would have been a bit of a nightmare. I guess the plating of the panels could have been handled okay. It may have taken a month and a half to assemble 100 vehicles.
Och han minns en dag då guldbilarna rullades ut för att sedan flygas över Atlanten till sina nya ägare.
The sun shone in Northern Ireland. That didn't happen very often, but it certainly happened this day. It was a clear blue sky, and the gold on the panels beneath the clear blue sky was absolutely spectacular. In fact, it's one of the most exciting scenes I've ever witnessed. When Stuart Craven was the guy who steered the car, I should say, out of the building, because he was being pushed by Dick Kendall, George Broomfield's right-hand man in the operation. It was really a tremendous sight. It's something that I'll never forget. I'm seeing it in my mind's eye now as I speak.
Men det man inte såg röken av efter bilarna lämnat fabriken var något som helst firande.
No time for celebrations, Mickey. You have no idea how busy you were in that run-up to Job 1 in the turn of 1980 to 81. It was seven days a week flat out. Of course, we did have to sleep, but there were some very long days being worked.
Barry fick 50 år totalt inom fordonsindustrin och började faktiskt som lärling på Jaguar. Men efter tiden på DeLorean-fabriken blev han vd för Sinclair Vehicles Limited som utvecklade och producerade elfordonet C5. Efter det startade han eget företag, The Montford Automotive Limited, som han drev under de efterföljande 25 åren där han arbetade i 50 olika länder. Men tiden på DeLorean Motor Company Limited var ändå den bästa när han ser tillbaka.
Were the best 4.5 years of my life. There's no doubt about it. Obviously ended in the wrong way, but even that for me was a magnificent experience because ending up as I did as the third and final CEO reporting to the receivers, and not only the receivers but probably the master receiver of that period of time in Britain, Sir Kenneth Cork, was in itself a real learning experience and something that I'll never forget, and I learnt a lot from. Sir Kenneth Cork was an amazing man to work for. There's no doubt about it, and to work for Chuck Bennington, Don Lander, and Sir Kenneth Cork in my few years with DeLorean, as the first Brit in and the last man out, was a real privilege. There's no doubt about it. A massive privilege.
Men vad tycker Barry om att DeLorean Motor Company faktiskt lever vidare idag i ny regi med huvudkontor i Texas?
Well, it's great. I think great credit to Stephen Wynn. I think Stephen showed great foresight in managing to buy the stock of parts that's consolidated and taken out of the plant in Dunmurray, and spare parts out of Irvine, California. And he and his team, James Espy particularly, I think have done a magnificent job in maintaining the DeLorean stock around the world. And I think the fact that of the 9,080 vehicles built, they reckon that 6,500 are still running from the west coast of North America over to New Zealand. I was absolutely astonished to find out there was an owners club in New Zealand, and there's something like a dozen or 20 cars out there. It's absolutely staggering. So the fact that all those cars are being maintained through supply of parts from Texas is a real tribute to Stephen Wynn and James Espy and their team there.
But there won't be any more of the golden ones.
Wouldn't it be nice? No, there won't, because the new ones are going to have plastic bodies. I think that may be difficult. Understandable, because that's the modern material now. But disappointing, obviously.
Och vi avslutar där, men vill du se hela historien om dessa guldbilar så finns Gyllene Vingar att se just nu på SVT Play. Ta hand om er och ha en riktigt god jul.